Hi, Miss Cindy here, back with at the Anvil Free Library with another story time for you. We've been looking at some bad guys in fairy tales, so we'll see who's our bad guy today. Can you say hello? Hello, 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 and how are you? I'm fine, I'm fine. I hope that you are too. We talked about the big bad wolf and the mean, ugly troll. I was thinking today that we might visit that huge, scary giant. Do you know any stories that had a giant? There was Jack and the Beanstalk. The story is Jack and the Beanstalk and the French fries. It starts out like the story we know. We'll see if something different happens in the ending. This is a version by Mark Teague. Jack lived with his mother in a small house at the edge of a village. They were very poor. They were so poor that when their cow stopped giving milk, Jack's mother feared that they would starve. "Quickly, son," she said, "take the cow to market and sell her for as much as you can. Everything depends on it." So Jack headed off with the cow in tow, and after a while he stopped to rest. And when he did, a stranger appeared. "I'll trade you these magic beans for that cow," said the old man. "Magic beans?" said Jack. "You must think I'm a dodo." "Oh, not at all," said the stranger. "And these beans are quite magical. Plant them, and you will have all that you desire." "Honest?" said Jack. What he desired at the moment was food. "Honest," said the stranger. So they made the deal, and Jack returned home with the beans. "You foolish boy," cried his mother, "you have ruined us." And she tossed the beans out a window and sent Jack to bed without any supper. When he awoke next morning, a strange light filled Jack's room. Giant leaves poked through the window. He stuck his head out, and he saw an enormous beanstalk growing in the backyard. "Ma!" he cried, running downstairs. "Check out the beanstalk!" It sounds pretty much like the story we already know. And then Jack climbs the beanstalk up to the castle of the giant, and the giant says, "Fee, fi, fo, fum, I smell the blood of an Englishman." And Jack steals his gold and steals his singing hen and his goose that lays the golden eggs. And at the end, I think usually he kills the giant. But let's see what happens in this version. Ma said, "I already did look out the window. And look, I made us some bean porridge for breakfast." Jack ate the porridge. It wasn't the best thing he ever had, but it beat starving. "Well, I guess our problem is solved," he said, and he headed off to school. After that, Jack and his mother ate beans all the time. They ate bean salad and bean soup, pickled beans, refried beans, baked beans, minced beans, mashed beans, breaded beans, bean sprouts, and even bean dip. After a while, Jack grew tired of beans. He dreamed of burgers. He dreamed of French fries. "Couldn't we have something else?" he grumbled, staring at his bean chowder. "Why would we want anything else?" said his mother. "Beans are nutritious and delicious. And best of all, they're free." And thanks to the magic beanstalk, there were always more of them. The stalk produced enormous quantities of beans. They grew through the spring and the summer and the fall, and even in the winter they kept coming. Jack's mother shared beans with the neighbors, and the neighbors' neighbors, and the neighbors' neighbors' neighbors. Soon the entire village was eating them. At first, everyone seemed grateful, but the feeling didn't last. At dinner time, Jack could hear the howls of children from blocks away. Please, they cried, no more beans. School was even worse. Kids glared at him over their bean-filled lunchboxes. His classmates said, "It's all your fault. You never should have planted that thing." "Well, I didn't," said Jack. Not really." But nobody believed him. Big kids threw bean sandwiches at him. Bullies chased him home from school. This has to stop, he thought. But he didn't know what to do. And then, on his birthday, Jack got some presents. He was given a beanbag, a bean shooter, and a slice of bean cake topped with a dollop of bean ice cream. That does it, he thought as he lay in his bed. That beanstalk has to go. So the next morning he grabbed a hatchet and he stomped outside. He was just about to give that stalk a good whack when the stranger appeared once again. "Wait," said the old man. "Aren't you curious? What's up there?" "I know what's up there," said Jack. "Beans." "Oh, don't be foolish," said the stranger. "Climb. Here, I'll give you a boost." Just then, an angry mob appeared at the end of the street. Among them were the worst bullies from school. They carried torches and pitchforks. They chanted, "No more beans! No more beans!" And then one of them spotted Jack. "Hey, look! It's the Bean Kid!" Okay," said Jack. "I'll climb." He gave his hatchet to the stranger and scrambled up the beanstalk. Up and up he went until the village looked so small below him. Jack wasn't crazy about heights, but bullies were worse. He kept climbing. The beanstalk disappeared into a cloud. He realized he was hungry for anything other than beans. But there was nothing to eat and nowhere to go but up. Finally, the beanstalk arrived at the top of a cliff, and from there a path wandered off into the distance. Jack followed the path until he came to the front door of a huge castle. Hunger made him bold. There must be food in here, he thought, as he slipped inside. Jack wandered gloomily through the hallways until he came to an immense kitchen. A giant woman stood at a wooden table. She was canning beans. "Ugh," said Jack. "What are you doing here?" she cried, dropping her can. I was hoping for something to eat." You silly boy, don't you know where you are? My husband is a giant, twice as big as I am, and lately he's been very grumpy." "I bet it's the beans," said Jack. "Oh, don't be ridiculous," she said. "Beans are nutritious and delicious, and best of all, they're free." But Jack was right. Ever since the mighty stalk had appeared, the giants had been eating nothing but beans, and Mr. Giant was sick of them. Loud footsteps sounded in the hallway. "Fee, fi, fo, hey, say, what's for lunch?" "Quick," hissed Mrs. Giant. "You must hide." And Jack dove headfirst into a barrel full of flour. A moment later, Mr. Giant strode into the kitchen. "Boy, am I hungry." "Good," Mrs. Giant said. "I made you a nice bean salad." "Bean salad," he cried. "But all we ever have is beans, and I hate beans." "Oh, we love beans," she said, "and they're good for you. How do you think you got so big?" "Dunno. But you eat 'em and you're puny." "I'm busy," she said. "Now eat your salad and stop complaining." The giant ate, but he didn't stop complaining. "Beans," he grumbled. "What I wouldn't give for a plate of French fries." Without thinking, Jack said, What was that? Cried the giant, leaping to his feet. Nothing, said his wife. I know what I heard, and it came from over there, from that flour barrel. The giant stomped over to the barrel and plucked Jack up by his feet. He turned to his wife and said, What is this? It's just a boy, said Mrs. Giant. He was looking for something to eat. Maybe he is something to eat. Look, he's already breaded. Oh, don't be disgusting, she said. Yes, said Jack, don't be disgusting. The giant set Jack on the table, but he was still angry. You know what's disgusting? Beans! He dumped a bushel on his head. You see? Disgusting. He overturned another bushel and another. He picked up great handfuls of beans and he tossed them in the air. Soon beans were flying everywhere. Jack joined in. They made a terrible mess. And as they did that, they chanted, No more beans! No more beans! No more beans! Stop! Cried Mrs. Giant. Both of you should be ashamed. If you don't like beans, plant something else. Plant? Said Jack. Something else? Said the giant. A vegetable garden, you ninnies, with potatoes, for instance. Why taters? Said her husband. To make French fries, cried Jack. Of course, we'll plant some right away. First, you'll clean up this kitchen, said Mrs. Giant. As soon as they were done, they headed down the beanstalk. The bullies were waiting at the bottom. There he is, they cried when Jack appeared. Jack wasn't worried. Meet my friend, he said. Once the uproar died and the bullies went home, Jack and the giant spent the rest of the day planting a garden. Grow! Shouted the giant. Patience, said Jack. Soon the giant grew bored, and he headed back up the beanstalk. But Jack tended his garden every day. The vegetables grew and grew. In fact, whatever magic had produced the beanstalk seemed to be working on the other plants as well. Before long, the backyard was bursting with carrots, corn, potatoes, tomatoes, and asparagus, and everything was enormous. There was so much food they didn't know what to do. So Jack and his mother cooked up a feast. The smell spread across the village and all the way up the beanstalk. By dinner time, everyone was there, even the giants. It was the most stupendous meal anyone could remember. They all agreed that the food was delicious and nutritious. And best of all were the French fries. Look at that giant bottle of ketchup. Oh, that's a different ending than we're used to. Sometimes we call that a fractured fairy tale. Let's see if we can sing about Jack and the Beanstalk. Jack and the Beanstalk, 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 Jack and the Beanstalk, growing up high. Can you sing that with me? And let's make a beanstalk grow. Jack and the Beanstalk, 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 Jack and the Beanstalk, growing so high. Can you climb up? Climbing up the beanstalk, 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 climbing up the beanstalk, up to the sky. What are we going to find up there? Can you look? Looking for the giant, 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 looking for the giant, up so high. Here he comes. Are you ready to climb down? Climbing down the beanstalk, 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 climbing down the beanstalk. Quick, quick, quick. Good job. You might like to sing that again. Well, I'm not sure all giants are really mean and nasty. And this is The Spiffiest Giant in Town by Julia Donaldson and illustrated by Axel Schreffler. Here's George. George was a giant. Look how much bigger he is than the buildings. But he was the scruffiest giant in town. He always wore the same pair of old brown scruffy sandals and the same old scruffy patched up gown. I wish I wasn't the scruffiest giant in town, he said sadly. But one day George noticed a new shop. I saw there was a sign outside that said, "New giant sizes." The shop was full of spiffy clothes. Spiffy? How about, what do you think spiffy means? Fancy. Or maybe, like all dressed up. So he bought a spiffy shirt, a spiffy pair of pants, a spiffy belt, a spiffy striped tie, a spiffy pair of socks with diamonds on the sides, and a pair of spiffy shiny shoes. Now I'm the spiffiest giant in town, he said proudly. George left his old clothes behind in the shop. What do you think they're going to do with those? What would you do? Toss them? Well, George was about to go home when he heard a sound. On the sidewalk stood a giraffe who was sniffing sadly. Well, what's the matter? Asked George. Well, it's my neck, said the giraffe. It's so very long and so very cold. I wish I had a long, warm scarf. Oh, cheer up, said George, and he took off his striped tie. It didn't match my socks anyway, he said, as he wound it around and around the giraffe's neck. It made a wonderful scarf. Thank you, said the giraffe. And as George strode toward home, he sang to himself. My tie is a scarf for a cold giraffe, but look me up and down. I'm the spiffiest giant in town. George came to a river, and on a boat stood a goat who was bleating loudly. What's the matter? Asked George. It's my sail, said the goat. It blew away in a storm. I wish I had a strong new sail for my boat. Cheer up, said George, and he took off his new white shirt. It kept coming untucked anyway, he said, as he tied it to the mast of the goat's boat, and it made a magnificent sail. Thank you, said the goat. George strode on, singing to himself. My tie is a scarf for a cold giraffe. My shirt's on a boat as a sail for a goat. But look me up and down. I'm the spiffiest giant in town. George came to a tiny, ruined house. Beside the house stood a white mouse with lots of baby mice. They were all squeaking. Squeak, squeak, squeak. What's the matter? Asked George. It's our house, squeaked the mother mouse. It burned down, and now we have nowhere to live. I wish we had a nice new house. Does George have a house? Cheer up, said George, and he took off one of his shiny shoes. It was giving me blisters anyway, he said, as the mouse and her babies scrambled inside. The shoe made a perfect home for them. Thank you, they squeaked. George had to hop along the road now, but he didn't mind. As he hopped, he sang to himself. My tie is a scarf for a cold giraffe. My shirt's on a boat as a sail for a goat. My shoe is a house for a little white mouse. But look me up and down. I'm the spiffiest giant in town. He is looking a little less spiffy, isn't he? George came to a campsite, and beside a tent stood a fox who was crying. What's the matter? Asked George. It's my sleeping bag, said the fox. I dropped it in a puddle. I wish I had a warm, dry sleeping bag. Oh, cheer up, said George, and he took off one of his socks with the diamonds on the side. It was tickling my toes anyway, he said, as the fox snuggled down into it. It made a very fine sleeping bag. Thank you, said the fox. George hopped on one foot, singing to himself. My tie is a scarf for a cold giraffe. My shirt's on a boat as a sail for a goat. My shoe is a house for a little white mouse. One of my socks is a bed for a fox. But look me up and down, I'm the spiffiest giant in town. Look who's coming along now. Looks like a princess and a frog. Does that sound like a story you know? George came to a squishy bog. It was all swampy. Beside the bog stood a dog who was howling. Oh, what's the matter? Asked George. It's this bog, said the dog. I need to get across, but I keep getting stuck in the mud. I wish there was a safe, dry path. Oh, cheer up, said George, and he took off his spiffy new belt. It was squeezing my tummy anyway, he said, as he laid it down over the bog. It made an excellent path. Thank you, said the dog. The wind started to blow, but George didn't mind. He hopped on, singing to himself. My tie is a scarf for a cold giraffe. My shirt's on a boat as a sail for a goat. My shoe is a house for a little white mouse. One of my socks is a bed for a fox. My belt helped a dog who was crossing a bog. But, my pants are falling down. I'm the coldest giant in town. Suddenly George felt sad and shivery and not at all spiffy. He stood on one foot and he thought, I'll have to go back to the shop and buy some more clothes. He turned around and he hopped all the way back to the shop. But when he got there, it was closed. Oh no, cried George. He sank down onto the sidewalk and a tear ran down his nose. He felt as sad as all the animals that he had met on his way home. And then, out of the corner of his eye, he saw a bag with something familiar poking out of the top. Can you guess what it is? George took a closer look. My gown, he yelled, my dear old gown and sandals. George put them on. He felt wonderfully comfortable. I'm the coziest giant in town, he cried, and he danced back home along the road. Outside his front door stood all the animals that he had helped. They were carrying an enormous present. Come on, George, they said, open it. George untied the ribbon, and inside was a beautiful gold paper crown and a card. Look inside the card, George, said the animals. George put the crown on his head and opened the card. And inside it said, You gave your scarf to a cold giraffe, your shirt's on a boat as a sail for a goat. Your shoe is a house for a little white mouse. One of your socks is a bed for a fox. Your belt helped a dog who was crossing a bog. So here is a very fine crown to go with your sandals and crown of the kindest giant in town. Yay for George, the kindest giant. You know, you could make your own Jack Beanstalk. Do you have some paper towel rolls around? All you need is some green piece of paper and roll it around the tube. and some Scotch tape. Make it stick on there. And then you need some leaves. I took some green scraps and folded it in half. You just want to draw, hold it up, kind of a heart shape. You have to draw it on the fold. And make sure at the bottom you make a rectangle for a stem. And we'll cut it out. And there. You've got a leaf. And it looks like a beanstalk leaf. I'll take some Scotch tape. Let's try going this way. Tape it onto my beanstalk. You can make as many as you want. Stick them all over. What if I stick one more on here? Get on, bend it over. I think this one will turn around like this. How's that? Cover it all over with leaves, lots of beanstalks. There you have your beanstalk. If you really wanted to, you could draw a castle and tape that on near the top if you wanted to. How's that? You could even draw a little Jack, put him on a stick, and have him climb up the beanstalk. Got a lot of extra time. You could even make a giant puppet. If you have anything bigger at home, maybe a bigger tube like a mailing tube or something from gift wrap, you could make a bigger beanstalk, or even a bigger beanstalk. If you had lots of paper towels, you could tape them all together and see if you could make a beanstalk go from the floor to the ceiling. That would be fun. We have lots of books at the library. Lots of different versions of Jack and the Beanstalk. This one was by Carol Oaten-Lange. And then we have some of those fractured fairy tales like Jack and the Jelly Beanstalk by Joan Holub. Or Jack and the Baked Beanstalk by Colin Stimson. Here's Paco and the Giant Chili Plant by Keith Pollette. It has some new Spanish words you might like to learn. Or maybe your family would like to try a read along together. The BFG by Roald Dahl, the Big Friendly Giant. You could have lots of fun together with that. Well, it's time for me to say goodbye till next week. Can you say goodbye with me? See you later, alligator. After a while, crocodile. Give a hug, ladybug. Blow a kiss, jellyfish. See you soon, you old raccoon. Out the door, dinosaur. Take care, polar bear. Wave goodbye, butterfly. See you next week.